Well, now it's time to talk about Dan's favourite topic, Aston Villa, who have been very, very busy, to say the least, this summer, Dan.
Well, when you're preparing for Champions League football, Olivia, you have to be busy, don't you? You have to be active in the transfer market. Dan and I were talking earlier, because Dan obviously covers Villa quite a lot for Sky, and we were saying we didn't really expect it to be a massively busy summer, and then suddenly the PSR deadline went by, and Villa decided that they were going to be very, very active. Look, they've lost Douglas Luiz, who is he's a big loss. I can't dress that up in any other way. I was talking to a former player last week, and he was saying he thinks that's going to be a big loss in the midfield. So I accept that there's a little bit of quality gone, albeit in the second half of the season I didn't think he was as good as he was in the first. What they've done is they've stocked up that area, I would say. They've got a better balance within the central midfield now. They've got more options for different types of games. They can bring in different types of players. So Ross Barkley's come back, a player that Unai Emery really pushed for in the midfield area. Amadou Onana's obviously probably will be a different type of player to Douglas Luiz. I would say he's Douglas Luiz's replacement. And then they've got Enzo Barrenechea as well in midfield, a young prospect from Juventus who's looked good in pre-season. Add that to Tielemans, Kamara when he's fit again. John McGinn can fill in there if needs be. He tends to play more in the wide or number 10 positions under Emery. Villa now feel like they've got more options in that central midfield area, whereas when the season was running down, you know, if the season had gone on much longer, Villa wouldn't have qualified for the Champions League because they were running on empty. It was the same team being rolled out every week. And I just think they've made some smart signings. You two will know Maatsen very well from Chelsea. I think that's a really exciting signing. You know, someone who made the Champions League team of the season after his exploits for Dortmund. Philogene come back, who was excellent in the Championship last year for Hull. So I think what Emery's building is really exciting. I think the focus now has got to be a little bit on outgoings, because they've got 4 players who can play left-back at the moment. So I'd expect Luca Dean or Alex Moreno to move on. There's talk of Diego Carlos perhaps going and bringing in a different centre-back. But I think the problem Villa have got with outgoings is that these players have helped Villa qualify for the Promised Land, qualify for the Champions League. They're on good contracts. They'll feel like they're owed a shot at Champions League. And Luca Dean showed last season that even if perhaps you're open to be sold, you can go on and play a hell of a lot of football. So Villa have got to get some outgoings gone, because they have spent a lot of money, but they've actually recouped a lot of money as well so far.
I was going to say, we just saw the number on the screen there, over 112 million already recouped. So, I mean, I know you're saying they need to focus on it a little bit more, but the business they've already done, yes, they've spent money, but they've actually recouped a lot of that back already. Yeah,
the Luiz sale was a necessity to fit in with the PSR guidelines, as we all know, and the Luiz sale enabled them to do that, along with a couple of clever homegrown sales as well, one to Chelsea and one to Everton. I think the surprise sale that maybe they hadn't planned for was Moussa Diaby going to Saudi. Obviously, he's only been at Villa 12 months. I think it was 12 months to the day that he signed. He ended up actually leaving. Villa have made a profit there on a player who started off like a house on fire, and then his form really dwindled and he struggled to get into Emery's best 11. He will need replacing. There's heavy links around João Felix. I still expect John Duran to go before the transfer window is shut. So I think what Villa will be looking at now is, it feels like all we're talking about is strikers and how hard it is to have strikers and have 2 strikers. Villa have only got Ollie Watkins if Duran goes. Obviously, Cameron Archer's gone back as well. I think if they can sign someone who can play in that second striker position as a number 10, but also when Watkins isn't there, play as a number 9 in a different way to him, I think that's what they'll look to do. And I think that's what they are looking to do with João Felix.
I think, as Dan mentioned there as well, I mean, Aston Villa's window so far is incredibly surprising, because all we would hear from Unai Emery, especially towards the end of last season, was when we'd ask him about the upcoming transfer window this summer, he kind of said, well, yes, we need outgoings, but we're not really sure what we can do. It might be, I think the impression was maybe 2 or 3 additions to what they already had, really. Maybe, as you mentioned, one would be sold. It feels like from the outside that Omari Kellerman sale to Chelsea was a quite significant fee that has allowed them to bring in those players we saw in the graphic a bit earlier. I think in terms of the incomings, I'm quite excited for is Samuel Eiling Jr. from Juventus, because I've watched him play for the England under-21s quite a bit for Lee Carsley's side. And, you know, we've seen what Unai Emery was able to do with Morgan Rogers, having just joined in January. By the end of the season, he was looking like an absolute elite footballer in the Premier League with just 3 or 4 months' work. And I think Samuel Eiling Jr., you mentioned, you know, he's another one who can play left-back. But I think from those incomings, a lot of them are versatile players who can play in different positions. And I think Junior's another one who can play left-back, left wing-back, or on the left wing. And you mentioned Moussa Diaby there. I think in those incomings, there's players there who have reinforced the wings, which I think is something they needed because there wasn't much depth there last season.
They're stronger now. I think there's no denying when you look at Villa's numbers, they're definitely stronger. But because they've got to register players for Champions League, that's why I think players might have to go, because you're going to have people who they're not able to register. As it stands, it's not sustainable to have 4 left backs. But you mentioned the young players coming in. The young players that are malleable, and Emery's shown already with so many players. You could literally name nearly every player in the Villa squad. Emery has improved them, and Villa are a much better football team as a result of that. So it's, Villa fans are so excited. The new shirt came out a couple of weeks ago, and getting the Champions League patches on the shirt for the first time. Like, Villa fans are absolutely buzzing for the new season.
We spoke about
have you
this.
bought one?
Oh, sorry.
It's due. We're still waiting for it.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, we probably had this conversation about Newcastle last year being in the Champions League, but I just wondered for you, not to put you on the spot, what would you be happy with this season? What's success?
I still think Villa will aim to finish top 5, and perhaps that's enough to get in the Champions League with however the coefficient goes. There's obviously going to be a lot of comparisons with Villa and Newcastle, but I actually think they're totally different, because Villa have got Unai Emery, who's managing the Champions League, managing Europe for a long time. No slight on Eddie Howe, because I love him, but he hadn't done that. Villa have had a year last year where they've played consistent European football throughout the whole season. They'll have learned so much from that. Yes, it's the Europa Conference League. It's a different beast to the Champions League, but they've got that experience now in Europe that they didn't have before. Newcastle jumped straight from no Europe into Champions League, which I think is harder. And I also think the new format will suit Villa as well, because top 8 go through to the last 16, and then from 9 down to 24, you're in the chance for a 2-legged tie to get into the last 16. I think that new format will suit Villa, and you're going to play 8 incredible games of football as well. So we're an attractive proposition for players to join. When you put in the fact that we're Champions League, the manager that we have, there can't be many better teams to join in the Premier League.
There's not many better teams to join than Villa. Kwaku, you were sort of, when Dan said this new format is going to suit Villa, I mean, do you think their squad's good enough now to compete in the Champions League?
I can understand Dan's very excited. Pour some
down,
cold
Dan.
water on that. Villa were very, very good last season, but towards back in the season, looked very leggy. And it was an issue for Aston Villa, and just about held on to that Champions League place. But I think there's so many players being brought in, and there's going to be a lot of turnover. You talked about there having to be an exodus in terms of selling players, because you can't register all of these players. Maybe the turnover players and the change of dynamics in terms of the squad might be something that they have to contend with, because last season felt very much like a band of brothers, and Villa were in it together. People didn't really expect you, apart from you did call it at the beginning of the season that Villa were going to have a very, very good year. But there is an aspect of Villa now, there's people expecting things from Villa this season. You now have to contend with Champions League football. There's a lot more games. I know you started your season maybe in July last year because you had to play the Conference League, but there is an element of caution when you go into this season, because like you said, we saw with Newcastle, big Champions League group, everyone's excited about the draw, the group of death, but great away trips for the fans. But by the midway of the season, they were struggling. And I expect Villa to do a lot better than Newcastle did in just terms of consistent performances. But I've seen it a lot where teams qualify for Europe and the next season qualify for the Champions League. And the next season's been a difficult one and a slog for them. So it'd be interesting to see if they can assimilate all of these new players in this Villa squad and it works straight away. For your sake, I hope it does. But I'm just interested to see if it does actually work.